Carlos, you hit on something really interesting there as well too. Sales cycles. Sales cycles differ so much by industry or solution area. It's and I think that's an area where a lot of sellers have a hard time, because not only do you have to adapt to what the sales cycle may look like, but you also have to answer to it. You're going to be asked about pipeline. You're going to be asked about when is this going to come to closure. And it's painful when you have to move something by a quarter or more. And in a pandemic and in a world of sometimes some uncertainty, it's more common to have to change the sales cycles. There's been a lot of impact. So I'm curious as to your philosophy to sales cycles in general. I know that you have some ways that you kind of distill the sales cycle, and I'd love to hear about that. But also, how have you successfully pivoted to a lot of the changes in sales cycles that we've experienced over the last year?
Yeah, so this is a fantastic question. And here's what I will tell you, Carson. My answer is going to be unconventional. I think when you hear this answer, your first reflection is going to be, hey, I don't know if this is worthy of sharing, right? But I will tell you, Carson, my philosophy is, I think when we talk about salespeople's ability to qualify a deal or qualify an opportunity, we're thinking about it completely the wrong way. I would actually flip the table or flip the coin and say, why are you not having your customers qualify themselves? Okay. And the way that I think about this is, I think of the sales process ultimately from the most fundamental, most rudimentary standpoint. I think of two buckets. You're either selling or you're building. Okay. Or in other words, you're either educating or you're executing. And if you really think about those in terms of first principles, that applies from the moment that your champion within the customer account is selling their leadership on your solution or your business outcomes or your specific value proposition, to the point where you're selling them on your differentiation as a technology vendor or as a vendor or as a strategic partner versus others, okay? To the point that they start flipping into, okay, we know the why, we're bought into doing this, and we're trying to figure out how. Okay, but ultimately, Carson, my big principle there is, we as humans always, if we see two buckets or we see two options, we immediately want to gravitate to one. It's psychology 101, right? If I see two buckets, I want to gravitate to one. So what I started doing very early in my career was, if I have a customer that says, hey, I am thinking of doing this with my data center, or I am planning to buy, to your point, I am evaluating a new vehicle or a new TV package. My question to them is always, awesome, I love, thank you for the opportunity of reaching out and helping us help you through this, just so that I can calibrate myself on your level of urgency, timelines, and readiness. Can you help me understand, are you in the education stage? Are you in the execution stage? Are you trying to build the case as to why things need to change? Or are you trying to figure out, how can I do this in a way that I minimize risk? And the customers will immediately tell you, and more than one time I've gotten the feedback of, hey, this is a great question. I'm happy you're forcing me to think through it that way. The truth is, I'm still thinking through it. I'm trying to convince my leadership. I'm trying to make the case as to why things should change. And I'm trying to quantify the benefit of that change. And that immediately, as a salesperson, helps you understand, okay, this may be a great future deal, but there's a lot of work that needs to happen for me to make that deal real, for me to close that deal, for me to really get that into the book. So for me, the foundational thought here, Carson, is two things. One, thinking of the sales stage as just a couple of buckets, however you want to look at them, building the why, building the how, selling and building, it's education, execution. Okay, so it's really bucketizing those two. And then having your customer tell you where they're at. The moment you do that, you're in tune, you remove friction, you're calibrated, you understand where you're at in the process. And to your point, you can even do a better job of representing your business, your pipeline, your opportunities, not only to your customers and yourself, but even from a business leadership standpoint. So I would say, from a sales process standpoint, Carson, that understanding and sort of thought process was super valuable for me.
I'm going to need to play this clip for myself every morning before I go out and try to have sales conversations. So, Carlos, it's just so many different possibilities there. I loved how you framed up the way that you can have that conversation, how you ask those questions to really frame that up with a customer, because you've got to make sure you're on the same page. It's so critical for us. And I want to stay on sales cycles because this is a great topic. It's so critical for us as sellers to make sure that we're on the same page with clients, but that we're mapping out that roadmap and what those milestones look like together. But if you're in a different mode than they are, it's not going to click. And so understanding where they're coming from and truly, again, we just talked about this as far as ensuring that the client is getting a win out of this. That's all at the heart of this. I've got to understand their budget. I've got to understand their timeline. And frankly, the viability of them moving forward in a meaningful fashion. What kind of resources are they going to need? So, there's an element of this where in a sales process, you never want to think too far ahead. I mean, it's kind of like in sports. You don't want to look to next week's game when you've got to play this week's. But you also have to be cognizant of what does a post-sales relationship look like? Because I think that's another area where we can fall flat as sellers if we don't give it enough thought. There's got to be a great post-sales type of engagement, because how often as a seller do you hear where something was sold and then they never heard from the organization or the seller or any of those folks again? So we've got to make sure that we set the right foundation, not only for this moment, but the process itself, and then the post-sales piece, because it's all about gaining buy-in and gaining consensus and building momentum around these milestones. Because from here, it's accountability piece. We want to jointly establish what these milestones look like, and we want to make sure we hold each other accountable to those milestones, whether it's, putting stuff out on the calendar now to say, hey, we want to have a touch point every X number of weeks. We need to have these players at the table. We need to bring these resources in. We need to sit down and talk a little bit about some of the things that are going to be critical to making this a mutual win. And I think if you do that, you can be very successful.